the 4th of April 2012, and joining us is RP Data Senior Research Analyst Cameron Cusher. Welcome, Cameron.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
Now, global market first, then we'll go national, local, and then we'll drill down into Adelaide. What's the global situation like for property?
Well, for property, I guess the economy's been a little bit more stable globally. We haven't seen too much bad news coming out of Europe. Greece got their agreement, and for the moment at least, there hasn't been too many bad news stories coming out of the globe. I guess the only one really is China, and the fact that many are predicting that their rate of growth is going to slow from about 10% to 8%. Most economies around the world would like to be growing at 8%, so I don't see it as too dire. Obviously, sentiment can still be heavily swayed by what happens in overseas markets, but for the last month at least, there hasn't been too much in the way of bad news coming out of these markets.
A little bit today, Cameron, with regard to Portugal.
There is a little bit today with regards to Portugal, and obviously Spain and Italy are also still of concern, but certainly those markets aren't looking as bad as we saw in Greece. But the volatility and the uncertainty globally will continue to weigh down markets, but it's going to be more likely to affect the premium housing market than the more affordable ends of the Australian housing market.
Right, now your new report came out for the month. How's Australia tracking?
So what we found over the first quarter of 2012 is that the market actually stabilised across the capital cities. So there was no change in values over the quarter, with a 0.2% increase in values over the month. Now, what we've seen is a fairly weak January, down 1%, a 0.8% increase in February, and then a 0.2% increase in March. So overall, not too bad. And it looks like the two interest rate cuts we got at the end of last year are doing the trick and are resulting in fairly stable housing market conditions, which I think the Reserve Bank would be fairly happy with. I think the housing market's obviously not one that's of big concern for them in any interest rate decision at the moment. More concerning for them will be the fact that building approvals are so low at the moment.
So the Reserve Bank not dropping their rates on Tuesday is of no concern to you?
Oh, look, I think we're still going to get some interest rate cuts, and I think I was probably a little bit surprised that they're holding back so long. I think it's probably fairly likely that we'll see a low inflation print when that data comes out at the end of the month, and as a result, we probably will see an interest rate cut next month when the Reserve Bank Board meets.
Right, we've done national now. Let's get into Adelaide. So what are you thinking about Adelaide at the moment, based on the research?
So the figures show that Adelaide didn't have a great quarter. So while values were flat across the capital cities, Adelaide actually saw a fall of 1.5% over the quarter, and over the year values are down by 5.7%. Now that's over the year. Obviously, Adelaide isn't the weakest market. Markets like Brisbane and Hobart have been weaker than Adelaide, but still we're not seeing such a ramp up in activity. Sales volumes that we've got to January don't show much of an increase, but I would expect some improvement in the February and March figures, given that we had those interest rate cuts late last year, and all the anecdotal evidence we're hearing is that there's more activity out there in the marketplace. So
the volumes are starting to track better, because we've been lower than the lowest volume since 1996.
That's right. So we think that 2012 will be a much better year than last year. And as you said, last year was the lowest number of sales we'd seen since 1996. Obviously, we had higher interest rates. We had constant bad news coming out of the US and Europe. And again, we still may get some bad news coming out of those markets. But I think the lower interest rate environment, the fact that people have been paying down their debt and getting to a more comfortable situation, and the fact that property values fell through last year, and for the most part rents increased, making housing relatively more affordable. We'll see more people go in and buy homes. And
now there's still talk that Australia's property market is 60% overvalued. No, 65% of the people think that it's overvalued. What's your comment about that?
Look, I think it is difficult for people to get into the housing market. You do have to pay a premium, but I think this is one of the shortcomings of the fact that most people live in the capital cities, and that's where most of the jobs are. If you look at the five major capitals, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth, 60% of the population live in those 5 cities. If you want a job, you've got to live in one of those cities, and people are always going to pay a premium to be close to the capital city centres. The solutions I see are either we densify the inner city areas and provide more affordable unit living options, and that's what we're seeing in most capital cities happening, or we send jobs outside of the capital cities. Now, that's a great idea, but I can't see government ever getting behind that and that ever really happening. So, as a result, people need to change their expectations of where they're going to be able to live and where they can afford to live, and either choose a unit or move further away from the city centre to get a house that they can actually afford.
Now, that's a great segue for me, mate. That's perfect, isn't it, Kerry?
That is absolutely perfect.
We've got this big campaign. We've got 20 auctions happening on Easter Monday down at the Flurio. We've got this big campaign saying to Adelaide people, for goodness sake, get down there and buy at the moment because it's so cheap. And what are your thoughts about that? Do you know the Flurio?
I do know the Flurio, and I know that the government's announced that they're going to upgrade the freeway down there and improve connectivity from Adelaide to the peninsula. So that's a good thing. I also know the market hasn't been very strong over the last 3 or 4 years, but certainly the values look as if they must be getting very close to the bottom. And there's potentially some very good buying in that area at the moment because prices have come off so much.
So it's basically a regional area that's within, well, it's definitely going to be within what I'd consider commutable distance for even first home buyers. So, and it's such a party place. It's like a happy place,
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you look at in other states what's happened as well. You've seen some strong growth in values in markets like Geelong in Victoria, and in markets like Newcastle and Wollongong in New South Wales. And I guess that region, the Flurio, is a fairly similar sort of example to those regions. It's still within commuting distance of the city. It's a lot cheaper than buying houses within the capital city, so it's a good alternative for those looking for a different lifestyle and a more affordable price point to purchase a house.
Now, Cameron, you're live, so this is going out there, out to the world. Tell me, have we bottomed out? And particularly down the Flurio is my interest at the moment. Do you think we've bottomed out? Would the next interest rate rise be a spark to see it actually bottom out?
I think the Flurio must be pretty close to the bottom of the market now. Adelaide, not so sure that it's at the bottom of the market, given the exceptional growth we've seen back in 2004 and then again in 2007. It might have a little bit longer to go to recover, but I think the Flurio is definitely fairly close to the bottom of its market, and we're seeing that although there's not really much in the way of growth coming back to a lot of these lifestyle markets, we have seen that across the country the rate of decline in these markets is slowing. And you tend to think that they're fairly close to their bottom. But again, prices in many instances have come off quite a bit, and there's some good buying there at the moment.
Cameron Cusher, as always, an absolute gentleman. Thank you for your very succinct and full report for this week's wrap-up.